Hello, I'm Jake Boudrot, Civic Journalist at Tello Community Television. Joining me today is the former MLA for Richmond and a former provincial cabinet minister, now a lawyer with the Halifax law firm Cox and Palmer. Welcome back, Michel Samson.
Thank you, Jake.
So you were representing the United Fisheries Conversation Alliance. Maybe you can start by explaining what is this group exactly?
So this is a group which represents all the lobster associations throughout Nova Scotia, and as well now is partnered with the Prince Edward Island Fishermen's Association as well. And they were formed in 2020 after the unfortunate series of events that took place down in Soniaville when Sabanakity First Nation had decided that they were going to have their own moderate livelihood fishery that was outside the control of Department of Fisheries and Oceans and was going to take place out of season during the summer months of 2020. And that led to conflict with the commercial fishermen, and there was a number of unfortunate incidents. And following that, the decision was made that have a single voice for the entire commercial lobster industry in Nova Scotia, and that's how the United Fisheries Conversation Alliance came to be formed, which also includes the Richmond County Inshore Fishermen's Association.
So what is this legal action about? At its core, what is this? What is the contention here?
So what happened is that following the events of 2020, Sabanakity First Nation in 2021 sought a declaration from the Nova Scotia Supreme Court. And in essence, it was to get the court to say that the Fisheries Act didn't apply to the moderate livelihood fishery for that community. So sections of the Fisheries Act, such as that you need a license to fish, you can only fish during the commercial seasons. You cannot sell, trade, or barter lobster without a license. That's some of the questions that they were asking the court to say did not apply to them. So the court at the time set trial dates for 2025. So 4 years later is how long it took to find a time in the court calendar. I believe it was 10 weeks that were set aside to hear this. So in the meantime, the United Fisheries Conversation Alliance applied to become an intervener in this matter to ensure that the commercial industry was aware of what was taking place and that their voice was heard in this legal process. So significant amounts of money have been spent on behalf of United Fisheries Conversation Alliance in order to pursue intervener status, and it was achieved, and to follow this action since 2021. So last year, as part of this type of legal action, you have a process that's called discoveries. And basically, that's where each of the parties puts up witnesses that they plan to call as part of the process, and then gather in a boardroom at a law firm and ask each other questions that pertain to this matter. So that way, all of this is done before you get in front of a judge. So unlike your typical court proceeding that you'd watch on TV, where people come up and are witnesses and are examined and cross-examined, all of this takes place behind the scenes. So when we were about to do this last spring, on the Friday before, we got notice from the legal counsel for Sabanakity First Nation and the Attorney General that they decided they were going to enter into a mediation process to try to find a resolution to this rather than continue to go through the court process. So discoveries got canceled, and they went into this mediation process, and the judge ordered that before any agreement could be reached, that the United Fisheries Conversation Alliance had to be informed and consulted prior to this happening. So in December of 2024, we went in front of Justice Keith, who was the judge overseeing this case. And at the time, Sabanakity indicated while discussions were going well, they had not reached an agreement. They asked for more time. And Justice Keith said, I'll give you more time, but I'm also setting dates for new discoveries to take place. And that was set on June 9th of 2025. And as we prepared to do 2 weeks of discoveries again, on June 6th, the Friday before at 4 p.m., we got notice from legal counsel for Sabanakity First Nation that they were discontinuing their legal challenge.
So as a result, now things are moving forward, I guess, lack of a better term, legally, is that?
So what happened is that when the pause took place last year for them to go into mediation, our concern was that the question around moderate livelihood and whether the Fisheries Act applies was going to be abandoned and never answered. And, the thing is, Jake, the moderate livelihood fishery and First Nation fishery, for the most part, has been a success story. The fact that Department of Fisheries and Oceans has been able to allocate the amount of licenses and quotas to First Nation communities in the last 20 years to go from zero to what is there now is a success story. And that's something we should all be happy with and focusing on. But instead, we continue to focus on where there's conflict. And that conflict comes from the question of moderate livelihood fisheries, or what being claimed as moderate livelihood fisheries, taking place out of season and without DFO approval. So when we saw that things were going to mediation last year, we decided that we would file our own action in court, where basically the United Fisheries Conversation Alliance was looking to Justice Keith to confirm that the Fisheries Act did apply to any moderate livelihood fishery or any other treaty-based fishery from any First Nation. So at the time, the legal counsel for the Attorney General and for Sabanakity said, well, we're not going to file a defense on this because we already have a live action that's taking place. So we're not going to do two actions that in essence are around the same subject matter and the same law. So we kind of put that in the back burner while this process was going on. But as soon as we received notice on June 6th that Sabanakity was discontinuing, the decision was made by the directors of the United Fisheries Conversation Alliance that our matter should go forward. So as of last Monday, our legal team sent notice to both Sabanakity and the Attorney General that they had 2 weeks in order to be able to file their defense in this matter. So this upcoming Monday will be the 2-week limit, and we will see as to whether they do file a defense or not.
Do you have any sense on why moderate livelihood fishery hasn't been fully legally defined?
It's difficult to answer that. It's been 20 years, over 20 years since the 1999 Marshall decision, so there's certainly been ample time. But DFO has managed to enter into agreements with numerous First Nations throughout the Atlantic provinces that do include moderate livelihood fishery provisions, but all of those are under the purview of Department of Fisheries and Oceans, under the authority of the Minister of Fishery and Oceans, and they take place during the commercial seasons. So the rules are well known in those agreements. The problem is that we've had a couple of First Nations say, well, no, we don't want to enter into an agreement with Fisheries and Oceans. We're just going to have our own moderate livelihood fishery, and we're going to determine what the rules are. And where you get conflict is when nobody knows those rules. And there's always going to be conflict when there's fishing taking place out of season, whether it be in Soniaville or whether it be in St. Peter's Bay, in Cape Breton, Richmond County, or anywhere else throughout Atlantic Canada.
Now, is the need to define it basically because of what you just said there, because you're going to have some First Nations deciding to go it alone? So if there is a definition there, they'll have to adhere to that.
Absolutely. And that's what the commercial industry wants. They want to know what are the rules that applies to moderate livelihood, confirmation that you need a license. You can only fish during the commercial season, that there's limits on how many traps you can use, similar to what takes place in the commercial lobster fishery now. When there's rules, when everybody knows what those rules are, then you can have enforcement. And as you know, enforcement in the lobster fishery isn't just done by conservation and protection officers. It's often a self-policed industry where the license holders themselves hold each other to account if anyone is seen to be not playing by the rules.
Yes, and that brings up my next question too. I know there was some conflicts or problems in St. Peter's Bay, which you just alluded to, just outside of the St. Peter's Canal, where there were fisheries from different First Nations in the area who were charged with having illegal lobsters and things of that nature. And because of this lack of definition, does this problem just continue on until there's some kind of legal definition?
It shouldn't. And it shouldn't because of the fact that when Sabanakity abandoned and discontinued their legal action, as far as we're concerned, that was an admission that they never had a treaty right to a moderate livelihood outside of the Fisheries Act and outside the purview of the Minister of Fisheries. If they believed their case was strong, they would have kept going with their case, but they abandoned it. And our message to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, which we met with last Monday, and our message to DFO is you now need to do enforcement. That anyone who is claiming that there's a treaty right to a moderate livelihood lobster fishery outside the commercial season and outside of the rules of DFO simply does not hold any legal weight. And so we are hoping that DFO will take the opportunity that anyone who does try to do this summer in Soniaville or this fall in St. Peter's or anywhere else that DFO is going to do enforcement. And we are seeing that taking place in Prince Edward Island, where they had an agreement with a First Nation for 1,000 traps based on licenses that had been bought by DFO. And then the chief made the decision they were going to issue more traps. And what DFO has been doing is removing them from the water. So that's a very positive sign. We're pleased to see that. And that's what has to continue. Everyone needs to understand the rules. We are seeing the effects in St. Peter's Bay, or in Soniaville, especially in St. Mary's Bay, where the stock is being harmed by this illegal fishery taking place in the summertime during the molting season and a time when the stock is vulnerable. We are hearing reports, as I'm sure you've heard as well, of the same type of damage taking place all around St. Peter's Bay, Ilma Dam, and all along the coast of Richmond County. There are reasons why there are seasons. This has been a highly successful fishery that has been built up through hard work and determination, through self-policing. We've seen just in Richmond County where they've lowered the amount of traps over the years. They've made changes to the size to allow for conservation, marking of female lobsters that are egg-bearing. All of these are decisions that were made by the industry to help protect its future. And we're seeing the results. Catches have been up. We're seeing better pricing, and that's because it's a highly regulated fishery that is limited and who can have a license, and that in order to get a license, someone needs to exit the fishery for someone to enter the fishery. And so because of all of those rules, it's been successful. And unfortunately, this little small section of moderate livelihood is what's causing grief, and we got to turn away from putting out these fires and instead focusing on the success that has taken place, where First Nation harvesters are fishing alongside non-Indigenous harvesters. It's a success story, and we see it back home in Richmond County. If you look at the amount of crab that's landed in Petit de Gras from First Nation boats, that creates employment for the community, that creates economic benefits all around. That's the kind of success stories that we should be focused on. And the only way to deal with this conflict around moderate livelihood is to finally have the courts answer the question of what exactly is the definition of it, but more importantly, a reaffirmation that the Fisheries Act applies and the Minister of Fisheries has absolute control over it.
So you're saying, or you were saying previously, that no moderate livelihood fishery should take place this year until it is fully defined under the law. Is that correct?
Outside of any moderate livelihood agreements that has already been entered into with Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So there are no issues with those because those all take place during the commercial season, depending on what lobster fishing area they're in, because they have different seasons. What we are saying is that there should be no effort or allowing anyone claiming that they're doing a moderate livelihood fishery that has not been authorized by Department of Fisheries and Oceans, that has not been part of an agreement that has been entered into by the First Nation, and anyone claiming that, there is no legal right to that, and any attempt to claim a legal right was abandoned on June 6th when Savanakity discontinued their legal action.
Now, I know you mentioned earlier that you served notice. I believe it was a week ago you mentioned that. So what happens now? Now that you've served notice, where does the process go from here?
So it's going to be interesting in the next 2 weeks to see exactly if they do file a defense or whether there's any attempts to bring in motions to try to stop our legal action. That's a possibility as well. So, we'll wait to see what's going to happen. We have our own strategies to deal with whatever the case might be that I'm not going to share publicly now, but we're prepared, and the directors of the United Fisheries Conversation Alliance and the PEI Fishermen's Association are fully behind our efforts to bring this question to the Nova Scotia Supreme Court once and for all.
Do you have a sense from the minister or from the department that something is going to happen there? Have you had a chance to meet or with the minister or talk to anybody in the DFO?
We did. We were actually in Ottawa last Monday, and we had the opportunity with some of the directors from the United Fisheries Conversation Alliance to meet with Minister Joanne Thompson. It was our first opportunity to speak to her, and we were very pleased to hear a number of times her use the term reset about the relationship that has existed between department and the commercial industry, including lobster. So we want to work together with the minister and with DFO When there were issues in Soniaville where the conservation protection officers were taking work action because they were afraid to go to work, we supported them. We felt very sympathetic for the fact that when you looked at the situation in Soniaville and some of the criminal elements that were involved, you're seeing arson, homes being shot at. This is Clare, similar to Ilmadam or Richmond County. Like, these things don't happen. And unfortunately, in that case, you had non-Indigenous individuals and criminal elements that were using the guise of this moderate livelihood to be able to buy and sell lobsters for cash, which is not permitted. And so we're certainly hoping that there is a new relationship with the minister. We are encouraged by the actions taken in Prince Edward Island of removing traps that are not authorized. We think that sends a good signal. And we're certainly hoping that that enforcement is going to come from PEI to both Soniaville and to St. Peters Bay.
Well, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with me and answer my questions and speak with our viewers. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Jake. And I certainly want to recognize Gordon McDonald, who's the president of the Richmond County Inshore Fishermen's Association and one of the directors. He's been an extremely strong voice for Richmond County, always reminds us that the illegal fishing is not just in Soniaville, but in St. Peters Bay as well. So I certainly want to recognize Gordon for all of his work and all of his leadership on this issue.
Yeah, it's a very important issue and one that I plan to keep up the speed on for sure. And I have a feeling we'll probably be speaking again in sometime in the future.
I have no doubt of that. Thanks, Jake.